My name is Sophia. I am 50 years old, and my life is like an elegant, but sometimes thorny composition, where each of the participants in the family story contributes his own melody, creating a common harmony with shades of dissonance. I work part-time, but even that sometimes seems like a miracle to me when it comes to being able to support each of my 3 sons, each of whom is going through their unique teenage years. Our eldest son is preparing for college entrance exams, and his desire to become a lawyer has long been an integral part of our family life. Law is not just a profession for him, it is rather a vocation, which he found inspiration for by looking at my brother Anthony. Anthony is a successful lawyer, a man with an iron will and commitment to his principles. A few years ago, he founded his own law firm, and it was this bold step that gave my son the confidence that dreams can be realized through work and dedication. Anthony, childless and married to an eccentric woman, has always had a warm influence on my sons, especially our eldest. These moments of communication between uncle and nephew seem to fill the house with an air of confidence and hope, and sometimes with a fair amount of fun. Anthony's wife, although she has become a part of our lives, remains a kind of mystery to us. We rarely see each other, and on the few occasions when she does appear on our doorstep, there is something unpredictable in her manner. She is known for her eccentricity, and her behavior sometimes causes slight confusion even among those who have known her for quite a long time. Despite minimal communication, she leaves behind a trace of presence, as if symbolizing the secret sides of my brother's life that I will never fully understand. My relationship with Anthony has always been close and strong, especially after we lost our parents at an early age. My brother played an invaluable role in my life. He replaced my father, supporting me in all the most important moments, from the wedding to the first difficulties of family life. When Anthony informed me of his engagement, my husband and I were sincerely delighted. It seemed to us that this union would bring him happiness and fill his life with warmth and joy. But our first meeting with his fiancée left a slight chill and bewilderment in my soul. Instead of the joyful and radiant woman we imagined, we saw a person with a vague sadness in his eyes, restrained and even somewhat detached. My husband, with his delicacy and caution, noticed this, but, as a man accustomed to looking for the good in people, he tried to smooth out our impressions. Add to this the complex nuances of hereditary issues, my fortune and our house, which, according to the agreements, will be mine if we do not have children together. This issue, itself exacerbated in the atmosphere of our relationship, adds another thread to the already tangled fabric of our family interaction. I couldn't help but wonder why my brother's fiancée looked so obviously unhappy, especially now that their marriage was officially concluded. Her fragile smile and careful, almost restrained movements seemed to indicate an internal contradiction that I could not understand. When my husband and I discussed our worries, he, as always, with a soft smile and sincere concern, repeated my feelings, noting that she lacked the joy that is characteristic of newlyweds. After all, she was lucky enough to marry my brother, a successful, thoughtful man who achieved his position through hard work. Now he has become the owner of his own house, which has undoubtedly become a significant milestone in his life, worthy of a holiday. When our family went to visit my brother to celebrate this event, it seemed to me that Anthony's house perfectly reflected his achievements: spacious halls, high windows, strict but elegant interior. However, the absence of the daughter-in-law, her tangible and visible presence, cast a subtle shadow on our visit. My husband, who always knew how to find a reason for a joke, teased Anthony, allegedly asking if his wife had left him, a phrase designed to amuse all of us turned into a dead silence. We noticed how my brother's face changed grimly. He explained that his wife had gone to her parents to celebrate her mother's birthday, and as it turned out, such visits had become commonplace for her. Then, while we were still in this pause, my brother suddenly, with deep seriousness, asked us a question that seemed to be in the air, but no one dared to say it out loud. Anthony, his voice slightly hoarse with excitement, asked us to think about the possibility of allowing him and his wife to adopt one of our sons if they could not have children of their own. This unexpected turn took me by surprise, and the words seemed to stick somewhere deep in my chest. I felt my husband try to diffuse the tension by laughing a little and saying that such things are usually not solved spontaneously. But I knew that this joke only superficially mitigated the situation, instead awakening a swarm of questions and worries in me. Over the years, the absence of the daughter-in-law at family meetings has become something so common that we hardly talked about her presence or well-being. It was as if everyone concerned had come to an unspoken agreement to avoid this topic, maintaining a delicate balance in which everyone tried not to touch something that could hurt the other's feelings too deeply. However, in the recent celebration of my eldest son's admission to law school, an event my son has been striving for many years, the issue of adoption resurfaced. This time, when my brother, with a seriousness that was almost frightening, addressed us, I felt that there was something more in his voice than just a desire to give warmth and care to our child. There were notes of hope and despair in his words, as if he was clinging to this chance with all his soul. This conversation with my brother opened up a whole whirlwind of thoughts in me. Our past, our deep connection after the loss of our parents, his support in all my life turns, all this surfaced in my memory, giving his request something more than just everyday interest. It was the need for warmth, in the sense of a family, which he was so looking for, despite the external well-being and a successful career. Despite the seriousness of the situation, my husband, with his usual lightness and humor, suggested our eldest son as a possible candidate for adoption. His casual remark brought a smile for a moment, but only superficially hid the gravity of the decision that lay before us. The offer was filled with ambivalence. I felt some peace knowing that our son could grow up in a family where his beloved uncle, a man who was infinitely dear and close to him, would become his new father. But this calm impulse was soon replaced by anxiety about how this dynamic would develop in the context of a strained relationship with my sister-in-law, who remained a mystery in our lives, especially now that a choice was at stake that would change the fate of all of us. In search of confidence, I asked my brother a question about how his wife views the prospect of adoption. His reply, accompanied by a strained smile, was intended to dispel my doubts. He assured me that they had discussed this issue and had come to an agreement. I tried to convince myself that this could remove the burden of doubt from me, but I understood that such an important decision requires not only quick agreement, but also long discussions. My husband and I decided to talk about this with our sons, since they were already high school students and could assess the seriousness of a possible step. But before we could get into the family discussion, something happened that none of us could have foreseen. A few days later, I received an alarm call from my brother's law firm. They informed me that he suddenly fainted at work and was rushed to the hospital with a stroke. My heart went cold. When I arrived at the hospital, I was greeted by his colleagues, whose faces showed serious concern. They reported that they could not contact my daughter-in-law, despite all attempts. Not knowing what else to do, my husband, my younger son, and I decided to check my brother's belongings in the hope of finding contact. Finally, we found a smartphone among his personal belongings. I dialed his wife's number, and a sharp and irritated voice came on the other end of the line. She mistook me for someone else and started a conversation with the threat of legal action. I explained discreetly who I was and the seriousness of the situation. Her tone changed to a cold apology, but her reaction to the news of her brother's condition seemed almost indifferent, devoid of the anxiety and fear that I would expect from a loving wife. Her answer left me with a heavy feeling. She just stated that she was too busy to visit the hospital, asked to be kept informed, and abruptly ended the conversation. This reaction was so frighteningly indifferent that I barely had enough words to describe my shock. It was as if she had cut herself off from the responsibility that a loved one bears. My brother, who was on the verge, needed support, and the realization that I could not count on his wife forced me to take on a role that I had previously tried to avoid. Now it became obvious that taking care of my brother would be our task. He had no one closer to us, and this thought, bitter but full of determination, helped me build a plan of action. These days, our family, united, waged a quiet and difficult struggle, surrounding my brother with care and support, despite his continuing unconsciousness. My eldest son, having passed the university entrance exams and enjoying a well-deserved rest, took on the role of a daily visitor, representing the whole family in the hospital walls, where his brother remained in critical condition. His reluctance to show signs of improvement lingered like a heavy cloud hanging over us. Through the concern for his brother, the absence of his wife, whose silence was egregious, became more and more apparent. I patiently lived with this silence, hoping for her sudden realization of the need to be there. But about a week later, I couldn't stand it and called her again, hoping to hear at least a drop of warmth in her voice. Her response, filled with outrageous expectation, hit me like a bolt from the blue. "What, is he dead?" This question, uttered so casually, as if she were asking about the time of day, knocked the ground out from under my feet. Restraining my growing indignation, I reminded her in a trembling voice that her husband was fighting for his life, and although she might feel detached, her support could bring him at least a little relief. Her response was icy and dismissive. "My presence won't change anything for him." The last straw. I ended the conversation, overcome with anger and despair. From that moment on, I had no doubt about her true motives and attitude. This coldness seemed to reflect something more than ordinary indifference. It was as if her brother was important to her only as a symbol of his success and well-being, and not as a person with whom she had once linked her life. All these experiences ignited in my soul an involuntary rethinking of his request for adoption. I realized that perhaps this request was not just a concern for the future of our sons, but also a desperate attempt to protect their heritage, preserve part of their lives and achievements, leaving them in the hands of someone who would appreciate and love them. And now, knowing about his wife's motives, I realized how right my brother could be, fearing that his achievements would remain to her as a closed, cold figure, that she could simply destroy everything that was dear to him. In discussions with my husband, we saw more and more clearly that gloomy, almost inevitable picture. If something irreparable happens to my brother, his wife will inherit everything, while he probably would like at least some of his work to remain in the family. The sadness of the situation seemed to connect us even more with the issue of adoption. We realized that his proposal could have been thought out and dictated by the desire to protect everything he had created. Discussing this issue with his sons brought unexpected results. My youngest son, having no established life goals yet, reacted to this offer with openness, seeing in it an opportunity to make his life easier under the wing of my brother, a man whom he has always respected. But the eldest son, whom I considered the most suitable for such a step, especially given his affection and admiration for his uncle, unexpectedly spoke out against this idea. He firmly stated that it was his duty to stay close to us, his parents, and take care of us in the future when we need support. I was glad to hear these words, but I also felt that he would be the most suitable for my brother. Nevertheless, all these reflections remained a shadow hanging in the air. My brother was still unconscious, and although I watched his condition with concern, I could not decide to start any discussion about the inheritance. I didn't want to touch his wealth, but I was still afraid that it would go to my sister-in-law, who seemed to be waiting for his death with soulless patience. When my sister-in-law, confident in her claims, snatched the life insurance policy out of my hands with a greedy gleam in her eyes, time seemed to slow down. She feverishly unfolded the document, as if anticipating a moment of triumph. But in the next second, her face distorted, her lips twitched, her eyes widened, and her complexion paled noticeably. The beneficiary's name, written in clear letters, was not hers. All her efforts, loud claims, attempts to prove her right to a legacy, everything collapsed at that moment. Her confusion became obvious to everyone present. The atmosphere around me, filled with quiet reverence for my brother's memory, now seemed imbued with a strange sense of malicious satisfaction. It seemed that all this heavy burden, all the long wait for justice, had finally found its place. The lawyers, already knowing that the dispute over the inheritance now makes no sense, only nodded coldly, confirming the legal groundlessness of her claims. There was both severity and an involuntary sense of satisfaction in their eyes. Not accepting the refusal, my sister-in-law loudly announced that she would challenge the documents, accusing us all of fraud and misconduct. There was a torrent of indignation from her words, but it looked as if it no longer mattered to anyone but herself. Her screaming claims and bitter accusations only increased the atmosphere of awkwardness. The guests, still holding respect for my brother in their memory, avoided her gazes, immersed in quiet conversation and the memory of the man they had lost. The scene tired everyone out. Gripped by a quiet sense of completion and a desire to put it all in the past, we headed for the door, silently agreeing to leave her alone with her ruined dreams. Every minute I felt more and more that my brother, anticipating all possible intrigues, had carefully and wisely disposed of his property, leaving it in our family and protecting it from people for whom it was only a means to achieve their own goals. There came a moment when the storm that swept over our family finally began to subside, leaving only faint but tangible traces on our lives. We continued to settle into a new house filled with the memory of my brother, and in every corner of his mansion I felt the presence of his refined taste, attentive attention to detail and desire for peace and order. It seemed that the house itself had become a mute witness to his life. Every element of the interior seemed to be trying to tell a story about his principles, honor, and the insight that was peculiar to him. My eldest son, inspired by the legal disputes and long discussions of justice that he witnessed, rushed to his goal with renewed vigor. His interest in law, which had previously been only academic, has now acquired a tangible, purposeful character. He read my uncle's law books, reviewed his old cases, consulted with my brother's colleagues, who willingly shared their knowledge and memories of him. I watched my eldest child transform, turning from a dreamy teenager into a purposeful young man, for whom the word justice was no longer an abstract concept, but became the basis of his life. He saw himself as the heir not only to the property, but also to the mission started by his uncle. My youngest son, on the other hand, seemed detached, often spending time in his own seclusion. His half-joking remarks that he was the one who should have been adopted sometimes turned into thoughtful glances, and I felt that a slight bitterness was hiding under the external amusement. It was as if he felt that he was left somewhere on the sidelines of this whole story, when events turned out that he was only watching from the sidelines, instead of becoming a direct participant in it. However, despite his slight disappointment, he supported his brother and did it with pride, as a true family member, realizing that his uncle's legacy had become a symbol not only for him alone, but for all of us. Every day in this new home gave us quiet moments to remember our brother, and despite all the unpleasant events, it was important for us to preserve his image, not just as a successful lawyer, but also as a person who always took care of us.